As a real Hawkhead, I feel an intense urge to talk about anything that might birth itself from Tony's withering, yet still so beautiful whole. In part out of love for a set of games that have no right being as good as they are, and in part out of the fear that unless Activision shoves their hand up the arse of Tony's corpse to hobble along Tom Clancy style, any entry to the franchise might be its last. The day Tony Hawk dies, I will cry like a father who has to lay their son to rest. Symbolic will his passing be of my own childhood, evaporating from the inevitable pressure of time and entropy. All that is to say, they made Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3+4!
Hold on, sis. Let's start at the beginning like Dad did with us.
I'm not exactly keen on remakes, a hot take that I'm sure we're all in agreement is stone cold at this point, but there's a reason that I bring it up. This is a game that's half remake, half reimagining, and in that half reimagining is half demake. It's a very weird game from a perspective of what it wants to achieve, and is also exactly what I would want from a game like this, keeping the spirit alive of what people remember. However, for all it attempts to change, it shuffles between improvement and flaw to end up at the exact same quality of the games that it hopes to revive in a different spot. In 2001, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 was a game that sat at the limits of what you could reasonably get away with in a 2-limit time frame and a checklist format. In 2002's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 got rid of that formatting, made the levels slightly bigger, and isolated every portion of the checklist into little objectives, in part because the levels just had so much to do in them. 3+4 puts these games into a blender. It's the 2-minute format of 3 in the previous games with the scope and scale of 4. It also adds new levels to 4, levels that are pretty fantastic, while still feeling right under the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 banner. It's a game in 2025 that has to recreate choices from 24 years ago for better and for worse. Thankfully, that means it's pretty damn good. I know, a bold man approaching 30 who likes a modern video game. We're pretty rare. I'm obviously biased here, but personally, through all my bitterness and cynicism, I had a great time. I didn't fill my adult diaper the moment that I saw Doomslayer do a kickflip, but I did point and pog when Denzel Curry hit my ears. In many ways, it reminded me that I still have whimsy in my soul. I also know that relative to most people, I am better than the majority of people at Tony Hawk. And that's not me just flexing, this is me flexing. It's going in the bottom right corner. I have enough experience with the franchise already that I can't reasonably be relied upon to recommend a game that doesn't represent the majority experience. This video is not a review. It's also not me trying to keep up the habit of chiming in about every major skateboarding adjacent release, but it appears I'm doing that anyway. Instead, it's a reflection of what I think works and doesn't work about aspects of the remake, what got kept, changed, added, and removed, and if any of it works or not. To TLDR it, I think most of the changes are improvement on paper, especially Pro Skater 4, which I adamantly dislike. However, I think in some of the ways that it's faithful to the original material, it suffers not in what it brings over, but how that's been translated into the future. If we were Facebook dating in 2009, it's complicated. But I still love you. I guess there's no good place to start with stuff like this, so let's spin a wheel and see where we land. If you're familiar with Pro Skater 1+2, this game's going to feel a tad deja vu, mostly because it's mechanically the same game. That might make this feel like a big DLC and not substantive enough to be a new game. As someone who thinks that the later Tony Hawks generally suffer from mechanical bloat, this is something I'm very happy about though. 1+2 and now 3+4 have, to me, just the right amount of tools and the best mechanic set, which makes your character feel whole without feeling like you've got a huge portion of the kit that goes unimplemented. About the only part that's redundant here is lip tricks, but that's a legacy feature. It would be like if Tekken 8 removed key charges forcing counter hit. Oh wait! It's a good base to build off of, while also existing with levels that are larger and generally better suit the kit. 1 and 2 have iconic levels, but that doesn't mean that they're the best. 3 and 4 have levels that make better use of rails and ramps that can flow together infinitely. About the only thing these levels do poorly is not implement enough walls, but I'm not trying to beef with a level designer from 2001. If you liked 1+2 and you wanted more, this is your game, making your wallet extremely weak to Activision's money magnet. In terms of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, this just means that it's effectively the same game with a better character controller, and that's a 10 out of 10 in my books. Some of the goals have been shifted around, and some of the bits like airport secret tape are easier to get thanks to a change in mechanics. About my only complaint into how this game's been translated is that I can't make my guy a little dude anymore. Pro Skater 4, however, gets a pretty substantial overhaul in everything but the character controller. It's not one-to-one, for example, wall plants wouldn't be introduced until Thug. However, the bigger impact is the structural shift that affects the explicit purpose of a level. Since 3+4 exclusively has a 2-minute timer checklist format, the environments of 4 have to fit objectives inside of it that it wasn't designed for from base principle. Aside from the existing types of missions, 4 introduced a lot of novelty objectives. The type of mission that builds positive association because if you clap loud enough, you're allowed to go back to playing the game you wanted to play. Skitch from side to side to avoid getting hit by the police. Skitch the elephant. Skitch the car. As a little cherry-picked example, and perhaps your first year multimedia class taught you enough to recognize that this is an example of bias. Good job. Gold star. I do not like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. Passionately. For everything that I love about these games, 4 segmented the experience into little bite-sized pieces. When all of the mechanics are mixed together, in the case of 1 through 3, you have a delightful little salad. It's tasty and it's so good for you that you end up going out and skating in real life. It's bliss. Maybe you get to the end of the bowl and you find out that you have these weird little brown vegetables that you don't really like, but that's fine. 4 gives you each part of the salad individually. You don't really like any of it by itself, but now you have more of the brown veggies, and notice that it was a little bit of Tony's stool the whole time. Some people are upset that 3+4 doesn't stick to 4's original design. To be a little bit empathetic to that perspective, while I get the idea that you want a game to be preserved, a remake like this is inherently not a preservation, but a reproduction. This is why emulators and preservation efforts, while I can't expect them to be supported, shouldn't have roadblocks in place. Wink wink nudge nudge. To say how I really feel, I implore you to go back and play 4 if you believe that 3+4 is a bad game because it doesn't stick to 4's original design. You might end up heartbroken like when Tony hit the last 540. The best thing about this game is that it reworks Pro Skater 4 heavily. Now it doesn't always work, and I have a strong belief that this formatting isn't a good fit for a game like Pro Skater 4 or its levels. I will concede, it could have been better. Even with that, the option to make an entire level flow together as one connected sequence is much better than isolating fake mobile game ads to create a game that never accelerates to the heights that it could reach. It does, however, attempt to reach halfway between me, the furtive 4 hater, and someone else, the loathsome veggie eater. A lot of missions here are appropriately lightened versions of their 4 counterpart. London's Tag the 5 buses that can spawn and despawn are replaced with 2 that are permanently in the scene. It pays homage while being small enough that it fits within a new format. Same goes for the skitching challenge that now asks you to swap between 2 doors which can be completed while doing other objectives. Some things do get entirely omitted, like literally removing all of the mechanics aside from turning left and right. What's been kept isn't just the stuff that pays homage to the original game, it's also the stuff that's core to the Tony Hawk experience. Wall Ride the Buses is a great objective because it can be implemented anywhere in a combo and reveals something about the game that the player might not have come to their own conclusion on. People see cars as danger, I say in a European accent, rightfully, so the objective has the player engage with them in a way that they'd naturally avoid. If this was in a Nintendo game, you'd be talking about it like it's 1-1. And while it exists in a game that doesn't capitalize on its mechanics in a particularly nuanced fashion, it's still a good lesson to teach the player an objective that the player might end up repeating. Similarly, goals like Gap the Floats, which was a repetitive and boring mission in 4, have been brought over with a much smaller goal. If the game had a do X move in Y location mission, it's probably been brought over, and that's fine. The 2 major exceptions to this are Kona and Zoo, which have been reworked into contest levels like in 3 that just ask you to get a score. Go ahead and call me the woke liberal, but personally, I like the transition. Zoo in 4 is fine, but Kona, as a place in a video game, was always a bit boring to me. It's flat and true to life in a way that's uninteresting, and unlike Burnside in Pro Skater 1, isn't blessed with the coincidence of working well as a gamey level. I respect the ability to capture a piece of history for an activity that's history is largely fleeting, so I'm glad to see it come back, and making it a competition where you get to focus on you and yourself as opposed to the rest of the space was a great choice. There might be less game to Kona, but it's a better level for it. Zoo being changed is a little more contentious. It's a better space to roll around, so you could make the argument that it deserved more objectives to encourage exploring the level. I'd argue that there's not a lot to explore, and as a level that webs out from a central point rather than wrapping around on itself, it's fine as a combo space but not great as a level. While we're here, most Pro Skater levels are not very good levels. However, this is an argument for a hypothetical world where Pro Skater adopts Titanfall level design. We'll get back to what I mean by that later. Generally, I think 3+4 has managed to strike a good balance. It strips back a lot, much of which was boring and repetitive. However, it touches on a lot of callbacks that aren't just callbacks, they're chosen specifically for what fits into a new, old environment. Even Alcatraz, a bad level in 4 and you can't convince me otherwise, keeps a fun but finicky objective with the loop that goes into a trampoline. Every player wants to do it, chances are though you'd only ever want to do it once. Instead of setting this up as a level objective that would need to be repeated in speedruns, it's a one-off for a collectible. They've taken a bulk of material, figured out what is worth keeping and throwing away, and thought about what was left and how it would be incorporated with the rest of the experience. It's not perfect, they're using a game from 2002 and being asked, as professionals, to run it down 2001 mid. What they've used works though, and even if you don't like it, I'd hope you agree it's a commendable goal. Now, new content. Tony Hawk's 3.0 plus 4.0. Thrice spawn a new level. Despite being a remake, 4 has a whole new set of levels and excludes 2 from the original release, Chicago and Carnival. Chicago technically isn't from Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, instead being from Matt Hoffman's Pro BMX 2. Quick aside, this game's tragic, and Carnival is just gone. I'm not sure why. Raise a salute to our fallen brethren, chances are nobody knew ya. Pinball feels fresh and fun in a way that custom Tony Hawk levels do. It doesn't feel true to a place but has a mechanical identity. This one specifically being a downward loop with boost pads that are thematically pinball but mechanically about keeping momentum going forward. It's great and I love this level. If the sack tap through the slime objective was any move that wasn't a sack tap and could be done both going up and down, this would be a 10 out of 10. Water Park is probably the most true to the stuff when it comes to Tony Hawk 4 inspiration. It's wide and open without much in the way of a specific direction, but still keeps a theme of dense quarter pipes in the middle that are sunken into the ground with boxes on the outside. I get the impression that this was blocked out by someone who really loved the fun park in Project 8. As a score builder, it's pretty fun, but as a level with objectives, I find it a little bit disconnected. In particular, the coin challenge and Drain the Pirates Bay. Movie Studio has a really nice flow to it despite being mostly flat ground. It almost feels like an extra Pro Skater 3 level inside of a Pro Skater 4 level, but that mostly comes from a smaller scope from deliberately being a contest level. All these levels are good, I had to give them a big thumbs up. They fit nicely alongside the other levels. However, in the same way that I might blend in with the EDL, fitting in with the crowd isn't always a good thing. To me, a whole new set of— hold on, I want to clarify, I'm not an EDL member. To me, a whole new set of levels peels back an Algorian level of inconvenient truth. Tony Hawk's mission design is incredibly dated, and removed from nostalgic context is downright boring. The levels, created as a plate that the player builds their combo meal of buffet combo on top of, is almost always fantastic. As a place with missions, it's often a collection of unintuitive to-dos. A part of this is the 2-minute timer. It applies a pressure that makes exploring the level counterintuitive, since unless you have a level perfectly memorized and practiced, that 2-minute timer is not enough time to actually complete all of the objectives, or many of them at all. You're better off spending the first minute and a half of each level trying to complete what's in view, and then prior to the level ending, looking for an objective and then resetting the level before the timer ends to give yourself more time to finish the objective. This is not a new problem. It has been a problem in the series since the very first entry. As you're less and less familiar with a level, this becomes more present, and it's slathered over the entirety of this game, unfortunately. This isn't me saying Iron Galaxy did a bad job. I would have called them Iron Galazy if I did. I'm just pointing out that they were forced to cook with some butter that was severely out of date. This is most present in 4, since the levels are often quite open and you tend to have to hunt for objectives. Since those objectives are spread out over an entire level, you can often struggle to connect the dots, as you're given a huge amount of potential space if the next objective isn't immediately in view. This is also the case for 3 though, particularly in the new Platinum objectives. Thankfully, the game does offset this in quite a few areas. Collecting Skate in Alcatraz tries to keep all of the letters in view or naturally lead you into the next letter. And Impress the Skaters in College pockets all of the players in one area that is thematically appropriate. At other times though, the game creates objectives that highlight this to an extremely annoying degree that had me Google the solution more than twice. There's a whole genre of mission in this game that I would describe as answer my riddle. They're either vague asks of the player with no clear method forward, or hunting for an unmarked item somewhere in the space that needs to be taken to another place. The latter is immensely frustrating, as the game doesn't make it clear what can be interacted with for these objectives. Canada asks you to get a flask back to this dude. Which flask? Where? This one. Why are we deliberately doing Where's Wally? In San Francisco, you have a mission to get rid of these dudes from the port, or whatever. A sneaky remix on the mission in 4 where you also have to figure out the same thing with very little info. In that game, there's seals, and you need to feed them. With fish, you grind box, make do fishermen, always on their damn box, make fish 4 time. It's an objective that requires a little bit of leaping and logic, but also it's in a game that isolates missions to specific areas, while giving it a context that might have you get from point A to B in a leap that isn't that dramatic. By not having the mission start in that area in 3+4, it's harder to come to the same conclusion, a bad mission that is made worse by its proximity to other elements. But here's the thing. That's not how the mission works in 3+4. Here, you have to ruin the day of an old woman, get pigeon seeds, and then ride the cable above them. There is no indication that this is what you're supposed to do. These are cherry-picked as the ones that annoyed me most, although some people might make the argument that this is the whole point of Pro Skater. It's about going around a level and discovering its little secrets. I don't want to yuck your yum if that's what you like. I will say though that I think that maybe Pro Skater isn't the best place for that, considering it's a character controller designed to maintain a flow rather than explore a space. Even if that is your perspective though, I don't think that these kind of objectives are the best way to go around fulfilling that urge. I'd much rather the game hide sections of the level away from me, like with the side street in Pro Skater 3's Tokyo, or the mega ramp in Water Park. The latter being an objective is a perfect setup. You do a task and you get a tangible reward for completing the objective. Something not every mission in Pro Skater can accommodate, obviously, and not something that's being billed as a remake should, considering its proximity to a recreation. That restriction, and yet need to make a game from more than 20 years ago feel as filling as a modern game, might be why objectives like go solve my riddle were included. Sure, people remember Pro Skater fondly, but I don't think people remember how quickly it goes. That need for more made the platinum challenges, and while I'm not against more Tony Hawk in the same level, it adds a quantity that's starting to interact with the quality. Once you hit the end game, chances are you feel like the levels are a little bit bloated. You forget what you need to do and where, and makes for a lot of restarting and checking your notebook. This might imply that I think 3+4 could have been a better game if it was smaller, and while I'm extremely in favor of smaller games, I don't think boiling this game out to its most delectable juices is the real issue. A lot of my problems when it comes to pacing could also be peeled away with a different way of communicating with the player. The idea that you dump the player into the world is true to form, but some reminders while you're playing the game wouldn't hurt. A little dynamic list with an opacity filter that gets filled out when you're close to an objective could have gone a long way, especially when the objectives are things like tuck knee invert the champions banner. Don't nobody remember the champions banner, unless it was the last mission that you checked on your fly-through cameras. It's not exactly subtle, but an arrow or two telling the player this thing here wouldn't have hurt either. I know what and where the transmission gap is because I'm 28 and unwilling to let go of the hairline. I am most people, but not in this context. When Activision decided that they were going to make Tony so big and round and so juicy for you, 5-year-old English boy, giving the player a big arrow to say go here to do an objective was necessary in part to find the things to do, and in part because there was just so much that without it, the level would act as noise between you and your to-do list. I get that now, as people who can read book and still want Tony to be so plump and juicy, we're drawn to the idea of subtly implying where the player should go, myself included. These games weren't subtle though, and in many ways through the fly-through camera still aren't subtle, so overtly telling the player where something is could have cleared up a lot of confusion. It could have even been done Airblade style, where the game explicitly points out one objective at a time without restricting the player from doing other objectives along the way. It would clear up a lot of confusion without removing agency, although it would remove elements of mystery from the level that some people might be here for in the first place. In an admirable attempt to stay true to that Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 experience, it sticks true to the formatting as it starts to expand in scope, and in deciding to stick true to what is remembered about Tony Hawk, emphasizes the faults of the process. Communicating with the player on what they should be doing is one of the extremely few flaws in a game that's otherwise firing on neurons that the English language can't fully capture. It's also the largest flaw, and while I can sit here and armchair game design my way to Airblade 2, that doesn't change the reality that the most recent Tony Hawk doesn't overcome an issue in the franchise that's been around since 1999. It's this push and pull between the old and new that's trapped 3+4 in a bit of a bind. New solutions that seek to push away problems of older games tend to emphasize all of the problems that can't be fixed in order to stay true to the experience. As a result, 3+4 shares a lot of the issues with 1+2, which shares a lot of the problems with the rest of the series. I don't mind those problems. If Tony's ultimatum is a 2-minute timer or NFTs again, I'll get the egg timer out and shake his still so withering hand. These are fantastic games once you're familiar with them. Prior to that point, your experience may vary. The 2-minute timer is better than the stop and start grand pacer test of 4, but reveals why the 2-minute timer wasn't in that game to begin with. At the same time, the levels are way more fun to travel around since you aren't constantly jumping into cages. 3 now has a little bit more to chew on, but the repetition of what it wants you to chew on makes you feel like you're not progressing quickly from one level to the next. The mechanics are the best of everything the series ever had. There's no but here, this one is just a straight improvement. The objectives within levels feel old and worn because they are, but considering it's within a remake, you can't make drastic changes to the formatting to not upset those who want an experience more true to what the games were, even if those games had huge, gaping flaws. I had a great time here. Cynicism is making me look at all the flaws. However, the clear conflict of interest between keeping true to an experience and trying to bring it into the modern age puts it in an odd spot that has me wondering how many people will fall in love with it. I still think there's a lot that could be changed to make Tony Hawk as a set of systems a really interesting, fresh experience that captures the hearts of internet nerds all over. You could take this set of mechanics and objectives and have a level evolve over time, or design levels that specifically focus on one particular gimmick. But if we end up with a Thug 1+2 remake, that's not gonna happen. Maybe that evolution won't come from Tony Hawk though. Maybe that's fine and it's had its time in the spotlight and everything from now will just be trips down memory lane. Reliving the past to be bigger and rounder than it was before isn't a step into the future though. And for everything 3+4 gets right, it's a game that has my brain tingle more at the thought of what these games could be if they had new and original ideas, rather than salivating at the Tony that's in front of me.